Hello, this is Curtis Jones. I wanted to introduce myself. This is my first time to make any kind of uh, YouTube video. I wanted to open up a channel. I started writing books several years ago, 15, 18 years ago, and I've progressed as I've gone through. Here's an example of all the books I've written. And at this time, I'm trying to start promoting my book. So I had an idea that I would set up a YouTube channel, and I want to start off reading every one of my books, one chapter at a time, doing one chapter a week, and post that on my YouTube channel so that by the time you've heard every chapter that I do, you will have heard every book that I've written. Some of them are very good, some of them uh, are just interesting, but they all bring a unique view to life. I have written three religious books. Will show who you. I started off. This is the first book that I have ever written, and I wrote it in about 2007. So it's been a while back. And at that time, when I wrote this first book, Amazon didn't do any of the things it does now. It had where you could put ebooks up. So after I wrote this, I sent off and had copies printed in paperback format so that I could so that I could sell them myself. And I started by doing with a friend of mine who was a writer who had written a book called 13 Ghost Stories. And he sent his off and had them printed in paperback too. His wife was the librarian, which was right next door to our house down in Florida when I did this and started. And he and I put on a writing class one night a week in one of the spare rooms the library had, and enjoyed that for a while. And he progressed and moved on, and I continued with the uh, writing class, and the people that came to it were already writing things, but they'd never published anything. They came so they could learn how to do the publishing that we did, and then we finished the class, didn't do any more, and moved on to writing other books. This book was written because one of my sisters had passed away. She had lung cancer. Bless her heart, she had such a hard time with it, and it finally claimed her. When that happened, I quit smoking because I'd been smoking for 40 years before that. And Mary was still teaching me after she left. I appreciate that. This book describes how humans look at time and how God looks at time. Pardon me. Anyway, so I did research in the Bible, and I started looking at the way God looked at times, the way we look at time, the way we look at death, and the way God looks at death, and that's what the book From Time to Eternity ended up being about. And many people have told me that they enjoy that book because it brought them comfort after they lost a loved one. And then we lived so far away from my grandchildren, I started writing stories about growing up. This was the next book that I wrote, Dad's Old Truck, Volume 1. At that time, it wasn't called Volume 1 because it was the only one I had written, and it had several chapters in it, uh, 11, I guess. And I started publishing at that time on Amazon for ebooks, and it did a wonderful job uh, presenting them. And I sold a fair amount, And the only reason I did that because people at church where I was preaching enjoyed the stories and they wanted access to it and able to send it to their friends. So that's when I started doing ebooks. And then I continued to write those stories. They were written so that my grandchildren would have access to their family history, some of the things that we went through when they got older. Then I wrote a second book called Dad's Old Truck 2. That's when they got the designation Volume 1 and Volume 2. And this one had 13 chapters, and it has some pretty funny stories. Dad's Old Truck 1 reflects mostly about my life from 9 years old till about 15 years old. And Dad's Old Truck 2 talks about going from some stories in early ages, but from about 15 to 16 up until about 18 when I got married. And it's a pretty interesting book. After I'd written those two, then I moved on and uh, wrote a book called Imagination. This one was a book of stories, some of them, part of them made up, but mostly true stories. And to protect my wife from what I thought of going to secondhand stores or antique stores, I changed our names in there. And that was the next book that I wrote. Then I began writing books about myself and my wife. And it started off with this book, Love Endures All Things. And it's 13 chapters as well, but it's about 256 pages. And I started putting together the Dad's Old Truck 1 and 2 because people didn't like paying after I started getting in print format like this. They didn't like having to pay $10, but that's what I had to sell them for in order to pay Amazon for the printing work. I put them two together in this one book. It says Once Upon a Time Curtis, and it's described as the life and times of one little boy. It has 23 chapters, and it is about 320 pages long. And that ended up selling for $15. And then I wrote another religious book. It was entitled The 72 Hours That Changed the World. And this book addresses the time Christ spent in the tomb or in the heart of the earth, the way the Bible describes it. He said he would be 3 days and 3 nights. But somewhere along the line, people got confused and said any part of a day is a whole day. Now, some things are used that way. It's a function of language. But when you add 3 days and 3 nights, it makes a 24-hour day for each of those. So it ends up being 72 hours. And I give reasonings behind that as I wrote this book because I've had many people ask me what how come the Bible didn't jive with what it says about Christ saying 3 days and 3 nights, and then people saying, well, he was executed on Friday and then rose Saturday after the sundown, which became Sunday morning, first day of the week, and so they couldn't justify what men were saying. So that's why this book ended up being written. And then lately, I've started publishing Walking with Christ. This book contains about 20 sermons, some 20 of my favorite sermons that I've preached. And I'm continuing with this, and there'll be another Walking with Christ as I go through. And people started wanting to know how they could publish. So I started doing this. Oh, sorry, I got that upside down. Started doing this book. It says How to Publish Yourself, and the subtitle is It's All About Control. Uh, and I've put seminars on with this book and presented how people can do like I did. It was 12, 15 years of learning before I got to where I was any good at it. And what made me good was having an editor that could correct the things that I do. When you write sermons, you're about the only one that sees them the way you've written it. But since you've written it, you understand what you intended to convey, and uh, and that's how that came to be. Then with Dad's old truck completed and out of the way, I had my life's history up to the point where I got married, and then I started writing the books about being married. That's where Love Endures All Things came in. The first one, the second one is entitled Love Endures All Things Across the Creek because it includes the next 15 years we were married, and it has several chapters to it too. It has 16 chapters or 15 chapters, and then a list of other books that I printed. Uh, and this one talks about when we lived in a place in Oklahoma where they hadn't run electric lines. There was no water lines. There was no telephone lines. It was an off-grid existence for about 8 years, and it touches on how we lived off-grid for that long. And my lovely wife, God rest her soul, stayed with me through all of that. And when I was ready to give up and move away, I said, let's just sell it and get out of here. She said, nope, we're staying until it's done and we could actually sell it for a penny or two. And so we stayed there. And I had a heart attack, nearly killed me. And that was in 95. And we left the place there. We kept it. Had a 3 bedroom, 3 bathroom house on 15 acres. And we left it and let one of my children move into it. And he wanted to buy it, but things can sometimes go awry. Anyway, so we ended up keeping it. And because I'd had the heart attack, I wasn't able to do work for a pretty good while. And so I ended up on Social Security, and my wife took the reins and took jobs and with my Social Security and her income is how we lived after that. And then I started preaching about 2 or 3 years after the heart attack. And so, because of her job, we moved a lot of places. And that's when I wrote this book, which, and I didn't write this until after my wife had passed away. And this is entitled Love Endures All Things, the Deep South, because we came south after she went to work, and she was management in food industry processing plants where they worked with chickens, and so we ended up doing a lot of traveling. And this book has 12 chapters, and it just has the names of the places we live because in the food industry, especially in management, you end up switching jobs quite often, being sent different places. So it has chapter names like Eufaula and Eufaula, Alabama, Farmerville, Louisiana, Muldrow, Oklahoma, Nycut, Oklahoma, Decatur, Arkansas, and so on. But this has about 16 chapters. And after it was all done, that was $30 to buy those books separate. And so I wrote or combined all of them together in this one book, and it ends up costing about $20 because it's 370 pages or something like. It's pretty big book. And then I started writing the stories that my grandparents told me, and some of the more modern stories. But this book is kind of a family history because I started off wanting the grandchildren to know their family history, and this one only has 11 chapters in it, but it's a pretty good book. It's about 160 pages long, and let's see, have I done everything? Oh, what happened was Amazon first just did ebooks, and then they started doing paperbacks. And I've been going along with Amazon ever since they started. And now they do hardbacks. And so I've started converting my paperbacks into hardbacks. And since I had just finished this one when they started doing hardbacks, it is also in a hardback form. This is the paperback form, and it's Love Endures All Things Until Death Do We Part. It's the Deep South, and I wanted to look a little different because I wanted to be kind of like a coffee table book. And this is simply Love Endures All Things, the Deep South, Until Death Do We Part. And it's in hardback. So eventually, I will have all my books in hardback, and I will be uh, starting next week. I will start posting my each chapter out of every book until I finish, and that will be about 164 weeks worth. But that's my intent right now. I want to I want to do one chapter of each book so people that can't afford my books can still enjoy these stories. They're very entertaining, and I've had people tell me they were wonderful stories. They just held their attention all the way through. I've led a very unusual life. I accidentally got in the Navy. How'd that happen? It's in the story. I ran away from home one time, not because I wanted to, but my friend wanted to. So I went with him so he wouldn't have to go alone. I know. And we were gone for 60 hours before the police picked us up. We left Stillwell, Oklahoma, went up toward Kansas City, and then went through Kansas at the southern end of the state, all the way over to Lamar, Colorado, and then went south to Amarillo, Texas, and then started west when we got picked up for being runaways. And then we were sent back home on the bus. And that story is called 60 Hard Hours. All of the first stories, like Dad's Old Truck Stories, are short stories, along with some of the other stories in these books on Amazon.com under Curtis Jones. And I have an author page there that shows all of those things. You can follow me there, or you could follow me here at my YouTube channel, Curtis Jones Writing. And you have a good day. I appreciate you watching, and I hope you enjoy the stories as I begin to tell them. I'll say God bless you and goodbye for this time. Now, how do I save this? Got to go to the bathroom. Mm-hmm. That's one. Oh, yeah, look at that baby. They got a good puppy. They got a good puppy. Let me put this stuff in here. Go. Now. There we go. No, 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 no. I got to do this first. I got to get this stuff done first, Lexi. Oh, I left that sitting in there. I left that sitting in there. Just a minute. Wait. I'm doing this stuff first. Got to get this done. There we go.